I think, therefore I am. But I'm thinking all the time, and I don't know who I am. Am I? Are you? I'm in the middle of nowhere, and it's a good place to be. Welcome to Just Nowhere with Dr. Samuel Zinner.
Well, thank you for the invitation.
Yes, well, my pleasure, of course. I have been seeing for several months different headlines in various news websites, such as the BBC, et cetera, right? Titles like Prehistoric Cave Art Deciphered, right, and et cetera, et cetera. So, right, so this grabs one's attention. But in any case, the study of the signs, geometric signs especially, in prehistoric caves and on rocks, right? This is interest of mine, and as I informed you in an email, right, I'm currently a co-editor of a volume on the origins and applications of language and number, and we do have a chapter on the topic, right, of these prehistoric Homo sapiens illustrations, if we want to call them that.
May I ask who wrote that chapter?
George Steiner.
Okay.
Yes. And so he's right. So his approach, of course, is similar. I mean, it's virtually the same, actually, right, to what we read in the paper that you have authored with several other co-authors, and that is, right, these paintings and these geometric signs. Most of them we could, I think, qualify as geometric, or what we call exograms, right? So sort of like an external storage system that helps facilitate some degree, at least, of a leap in Homo sapiens' cognitive abilities, right? And but in any case, so right, so we're talking about 42,000 years to about 37,000 years before the present, correct?
I think in the paper we cover a much broader range of that.
Right.
We start, the dating is very difficult initially. So shall we say 38,000, 40,000, 43,000 years ago.
Right.
And then we will probably go to about 10 or 11,000 years ago. So it's a very great span.
Right, fair enough. Yes. All right, and and at least those who are acquainted with the literature on these markings, let's call them, and paintings, right? Many authors have suspected in some way that something, right, involving numbering or numerosity, right, is involved, right, and that's very well covered in the paper, right, that your name leads, right. All right, so can you tell us then, just briefly, or at length as you will, how you have advanced, right, the theory and the scholarship, right, on understanding just what these signs are?
I think there's been speculation, as you say, for a long time that our ancestors, if we can call them that, were able to use numbers. And we know this because of the many thousands of tally sticks. These are pieces of rock or bone with notches on them with fit mathematical theory, but we can't prove that they're actually counting sticks. They could be counting number of hand axes or numbers of days in a journey.
Sure.
Or equally, they could be doodles. We think they're numbers, they're almost certainly numbers, but we've not been able to prove it. But because we have these sequences of notches or dots with an animal, we can then form the context of the dots, or a possible context for the dots. Because before, the dots or the lines would just exist on a stick on its own.
Right.
But now it's associated with an animal. So we have a possible, what before was oral information, now it becomes written information with the two pieces of information together in one place. And by assembling a large database of 700 examples, we were able to demonstrate that this was almost certainly a lunar calendar in use with these animals. There's no absolute proof, but I think statistically our work was very, very convincing. And this, I think, moves our knowledge forward because many people think that this advanced numerosity, the ability to count beyond, say, 20 or so, only came into common practice in the Sumerian time, maybe 5,000 years ago. And while people speculate it was in use before that, no one's been able to prove it. But I think we've actually advanced fairly conclusive proof that they were able to use numbers, certainly in the hundreds, to work out a lunar calendar. And with numbers, I think it's accepted that once you can use numbers above 20 fluently, which you have to in a calendar,
Right.
you're fully numerate. There's no limit to what you can do.
Yes, yes. Well, so, all right. So we're talking basically, though, about at least the beginning of the Upper Paleolithic. And now this information, as you say, right, the dots or the lines, right? So now we're lucky because they're correlated with specific prey animals. But so that's an important part of this argumentation is that, right, we're dealing with specific prey animals. So this has something to do with survival and calculation, right, relating to hunting, basically. Is that correct?
Yes, I think so. I think that what they are doing is they're, in a sense, almost keeping a scientific record of their sightings of these animals and the times when they were available. And they're recording this information. Now, our argument would be that if you kill an animal today, the only reason to record that you have killed it is for future reference to that event, unless it's a religious celebration of killing an animal or something like that. But in general, any kind of record system is for the future. So what we would say is these people they're planning their future around hunting, but they also have a concept of the future. They have a concept of tomorrow and their place of themselves tomorrow or a year from now. And that we also think is quite a profound accomplishment of these people. And it's an important part of our work that these aren't people who were hoping to catch food and who just went out and used native lore. They use science and recording. We're working on a paper now where the spawning sites for salmon and sea trout are recorded, and the spawning of the sea trout and the salmon, because it happens so late in the year, becomes a vital resource for surviving the winter. So they have used a common sign from Cantabria to Western Russia to indicate this is an important spawning site. And then you could say, well, how do you know this? And we would say, well, because where these stones are found or where these marks are found are spawning sites. There's significant spawning sites. And all the hunting equipment associated with fishing is there, like harpoons and plaquettes of fish and images of fish. So this recording of all spawning sites, or many spawning sites, is in itself quite a profound scientific achievement, because not only are you recording specific information for a site, but you're creating an image of these sites effectively across Europe. So that were people to move from place to place and encounter this sign in a different cave, they would say, this is an important spawning site for fish. So this becomes not only about individual survival, but about group survival, I think. It's about the future. It's about the group. It's about a high-functioning society, I think, intellectually, but also socially.
Of course, what's striking about these signs of the paintings and the system, right, of the dots or lines, right, is that they seem to be, well, they are, right, temporally and of course, vast stretches of temporality. So temporally, but also geographically consistent.
Yes, I think that's very well put. as I just said, this sign for spawning ground has a very brief life. It only appeared about 16,000 years ago and lasted to 11,000 years, which in the context of this world is not very long. But somehow or the other, within this brief time, it is spread all across Europe from Western Spain to Western Russia, and is in use with a common understanding. It has a common meaning. So that is in itself interesting, that they have invented a word for this new need, and then relatively quickly it spread across. We don't know how quickly it spread because the dating of many of these artifacts is just not that precise. So it appears to be the universality of this would indicate that one, that this, whatever this system is doing is important. If it lasts for that long, it can't be something, a temporary religious belief or something about luck or hunting magic. This has real value. This is something that will keep you alive. Therefore, it's maintained. And there appears to be, one would imagine, effort put into maintaining it. And part of the caves may be about maintaining this information, about recording it.
So we could call it a survival technology that is consistent over tens of thousands of years.
I would say so. I mean, the Sumerians and the Egyptians and the Chinese invented writing in order to sustain their economic system. And because their economic systems are so complex, their writing rapidly became very, very complex. And these people have developed a writing system that maintains their way of living, not their economic system, but their way of living. And it's a very simple and logical idea, I think. There are authors who have said that what they speculate is that the first use of numerosity, of numbers above 20, would be in the formation of lunar calendars. They think that would be a natural driver of the use of numbers. And the need to divide numbers. If you're counting hand axes, you just need to count them. You don't need to do any operations with them. But if you're using a calendar with weeks and 12 lunar months or 13 lunar months to a year and the season starting, it becomes, you need to start manipulating numbers. And some people very perceptively have said they suspect that, and there's one author, in fact, who said that they suspected that the first use of sophisticated numbers before the Sumerians or the Chinese and these other people would be in a lunar calendar. And this person said that the only way to prove numerosity would probably be through analyzing how that calendar was used to prove that it was a calendar divided into these subunits.
And I think that's basically what you're arguing you have accomplished, right, with this research. That's the way I would interpret it, at least.
I think so. And what becomes interesting is we have a calendar. And do you recall reading about the Y sign within the calendar?
Yes, I was just going to get there, because the dots and the lines, of course, would represent the cardinal numbers. But then when we have the Y-like sign now, of course, now it appears to function as ordinal number. So.
Yes, and it also, the way that we express it is there are a series of these signs. Y is one of them. Y is one that we focused on because it is such an important sign in the Upper Paleolithic. But there are different animal behaviors. There's giving birth, which is Y, but there is mating. There's when the herds aggregate, when the herds disaggregate, when the herds cross the fording places. And all these activities are indicated by a sign, and that sign is placed in its correct temporal position within these series of lines. So that will tell you that, say, if you have a reindeer and a sequence of lines with the sign for crossing the ford in position 7 or 8, that means at that cave, at that location, reindeer will cross the ford at that time. And you can then hunt them. So we chose Y, and why? Because it was easy to demonstrate, and because it gave us one of the vital signs in this world, which is about the transmission of life, as Delport called it. It's a very, very important part of their world. The cycle of mating, the cycle of gestation, the cycle of giving birth.
Well, yes. Well, at the time that the essay was published, seems to be that you have a solid interpretation, a solid understanding of the dot, the line, and this Y-shaped sign. Now, is that still about where it is, or have you been able to identify the function or meaning of any of these other probably hundreds of signs, or you're not there yet?
No. Academic publishing, as I'm sure you know, is a
Mhm.
very slow
Yes, yes, yes.
process.
Takes years. Yes,
It's glacial.
sometimes.
That's the
Yes,
expression we use.
yes, yes.
And while we go through the process of submitting and peer review and all the rest, I mean, we are working away, and we've made considerable. For example, we understand the sign for spawning grounds now,
All
and
right.
that's another step forward. And I would say we know the meaning of maybe a couple dozen, something like that.
Oh,
But as my colleagues say, there's a big step between thinking you know something and proving it.
yes, yes.
So we're pretty confident, and we're writing papers, and we will continue to write and submit. But what I feel in a way, our contribution is not actually understanding the system, but making it clear to people that it is possible to understand it.
Yes.
It's our methodology of big data sets, of analytic thinking, of only saying what you can reasonably demonstrate, that should fuel other people to do this work.
Yes.
And whether we do it or other people do it is in a sense irrelevant to us. We want it done. But I think that, in a way, is really what I'm proudest of. So we have said before, I'm sure you've read that people have thought this work is impossible, you can't do it, these signs are enigmatic, is a word that they use. We may be able to demonstrate using quantitative semantics patterns or co-occurrences, but the meaning will elude us. And I think we're saying, because of this fortunate part of their system, which is the co-occurring of signs with animals in a specific place, we can take our knowledge, which is factual, of the place, our knowledge, which is factual, of the animal, and that gives us, across a big database, a reasonable interpretation of what the sign means.
Yes. Well, I think it's quite convincing, right? To the interpretation that you're giving. For instance, there's a painting of a gazelle, right? Then there's a series of dots or lines, right? And so each one of the dots or each one of the lines, right? Correct me if you need to, would then represent one lunar month, right? And then you just need to know when this type of animal is going to be showing up in that region, right? So you know when the hunting season, right, is going to be
Yes.
right, and you know when they'll be mating and giving birth.
Well,
right?
not just see when they mate and when they give birth is a constant. That's not a variable.
Right.
But where they give birth and where they mate is a variable. So the lines and dots will record the behavior, but the cave, for example, will record that it happens here.
Yes.
So that I think is important. The behavioral cycles are in variables, but the place of these behaviors is a variable.
Yes. Yes. All right. Here's a question. I don't know if anyone's ever asked it of you before. But all right, so we see these, especially the paintings inside the caves. They're wonderful. Some people liken them to Cézanne or something like this. And of course, popularly, they're known as art, even though that carries a lot of cultural specific baggage. We really can't project that, because here we're not seeing art, right? We're seeing a survival technology. But these paintings are incredibly realistic and accurate. All right. So my question is, and I know this is the type of question that a popular audience also will be asking themselves. All right. So it's just not everyone or anyone who would be able to execute such realistic representations, right? And so how were they able to do it, right? So All right, so bear with me. Different scenarios that one might fantasize. All right, so let's take a carcass. Let's take one of these dead animals in here and look at it and try to keep referencing the way a lot of painters and drawers will do, right? Or did particular individuals have an extremely vivid memory, or and here's where I'll end, so you can respond. Could this have something to do with these plaquettes that you've spoken about? Right, these smaller pieces with representations on them. Could you know etchings have been made right on the field, right, looking at the animals as they were grazing or whatever, and then right these are brought inside the cave and just used as a reference? Or what is your musings on that?
What I would say is I think all the things you have said are probably true. There's no reason why these objects can't be polysemic. I think if we try to say they are art or they are writing or they are this or they are that, it limits our understanding of them.
Yes.
One cautionary thing I would say is we are 21st century beings, and
Yes.
in our culture, we effectively elevate art pretty much above everything else.
Agreed.
If you want to be someone, you want to be Shakespeare, or you want to be Rodin, or you want to be Mozart. You want to be an artist. We don't necessarily know that that holds true for them. So that would be one little caveat that I would make.
Yes.
But another thing about their familiarity with the animals, remember, we're separated. I don't know about you, but I'm separated from animals. I might see a dog every now and then. They live amongst the animals.
Yes.
They're butchering the animals. They are butchering the animals every week. They know animals.
Right.
And maybe they sketch them. But also, and remember, Michelangelo and Da Vinci they did anatomy on human beings, didn't they, in order to understand them.
That's right.
And these people are butchering all the time, and they understand the animals. And you may well be right that they're out in the field, seeing some antelope in the distance and doing a quick little sketch, if you like, of it. I think all these things are possible. I think one thing that has struck me, I've looked at thousands upon thousands of images, is that the number of images of supreme quality is way above the amount that it should be, way above the number that it should be.
Yes. Agreed.
That is, it is as if I don't know, you can go to a cave. It'll be a small cave with a relatively small population. There will be a drawing of the most unimaginable beauty there, which is presumably produced from a group of 15 or 20 people. And these statistics are unusual, I think. And maybe it's the fact that they were constantly using their hands, very skilled with their hands, very adroit with their hands. Because remember, the use of skilled muscle use in precise ways that only human beings can do is a trigger of abstraction and a trigger of intelligence and all these other skills. So I feel that it's a bundle of skills, I think, of which I think writing and communication skills, metaphor, analogy, things like that are probably part of it. I think everything you said is true, or very, very probably true. But I think we should open it up and not saying, oh, they're great art. It can be great art. It can be good writing. It can be scientific information. See, I think another issue that we have with modern human beings is, say you want to see Shakespeare. You go to a library and you get the Shakespeare book. And say you want to see Rodin, you'll go to a museum, which is a separate building. And say you want to hear music, you go somewhere else. They don't seem to separate these abstractive qualities. They're quite happy to create an animal and put numbers and what appears to be a kind of writing on it, which we probably wouldn't do as a norm, would we? But I think we artificially separate out these abstractions, whereas I think it certainly appears that they view all abstractions are the same. And as they're all located in the same part of the brain, it's quite a logical way of reasoning. Maybe we're wrong to separate these out.
Right. Yes. Well, my initial starting point when I ever see this wording, right, prehistoric cave art, right, I see that my immediate reaction is that of many experts, right, and that is that that's really a projection, right, of our modern cultural standards
Yeah.
onto, right, and so. And I wholeheartedly agree with that criticism. On the other hand, um, it's impossible for us at such an immense remove temporally to absolutely exclude this possibility that there was something like these feelings that we have when we look at a piece of something that we know was created as art, that some similar feeling may not have been operative right there. They look at it, it's a survival strategy, it's a survival technique, as I like to call it, and yet a survival technique may have meant much more to them aesthetically, right, than it might to us, right? All of our techniques for surviving in the modern world. So one can never exclude that, but I certainly do prefer referring to cave paintings or etchings rather than art. But in any case,
we call them images. We
yes,
call them images, and we call the writing we call marks.
right, images and marks and exograms. It's a little esoteric for a popular audience, but that's a very serviceable.
They're neutral
term as well.
terms, and they're factual. Yes. As you say, if we call it art, we are back projecting. Another problem with calling it art is that in the modern world, we're taught that artists have a unique view of the world, which they express in a unique way. And an ordinary person, such as myself, could never hope to emulate that. So we're automatically saying, once we call one of these beautiful images a piece of art, if I say, oh, that's a beautiful piece of art, I'm automatically saying at the same time, I can't understand it because I'm not a unique individual.
Absolutely. Yes, correct. Well, you mentioned Sumer before.
Yes.
And in the context that you've mentioned Sumer elsewhere in other interviews that you've given that I've listened to or that I've read, it's usually with reference to the clay tablets, right? And the serving economic purposes. You have 15 sheep, so you're only going to have 15 lines or 15 dots. But what made me think of Sumer, though, was your discussion of this vast amount of plaquettes, because it almost makes one think of an archive, right? So the question there is, and I know there's some thinking on this, so to a certain extent, right, I'm asking rhetorical questions for the sake of the audience
that's fine.
Read all this literature, but all right. So the plaquettes, could you please tell us, what they were and how they function? But the one specific question that I haven't heard directed to you yet is, right, are these plaquettes, were they created, and so after you finish one, do you basically throw them away, or are they used for future reference?
Okay, so that's brilliant, and it's one of the questions that completely upends the argument that all these things are art. The life cycle of a plaquette is plaquettes are made from three kinds of stone. They're made from slate, sandstone, and another stone, which I can't remember at the moment. But these stones can be carried for 100 or 200 kilometers to a site.
Sure.
So you may not have slate where you are, which is the primary material. So you might have to carry it 50 miles in. Once you get it to your cave, and this will be a habitation cave. Not all caves are inhabited. A great cave like Lascaux or some of these other great caves may not have had permanent populations. They appear to be some kind of social place rather than a living place. But you do have caves which are functional, which will have a living space. They'll have a butchery space. They'll have there are various sections there.
Yes.
So these plaquettes, these pieces of flint, will then be, or slate, will then be smoothed, which is laborious, because you need a smooth surface for your burring to work on. They'll be smooth both sides, polished, if you like. So these represent the labor of carrying them. They represent the labor of smoothing them. And then you engrave them, and you will engrave your animal on them. And skilled engravers, I've worked with engravers who work on metal, and they can do these things relatively quickly. It'd be 15, 20 minutes to do a lovely red deer or something like that. Now you have your animal. Where that animal is located is an oral piece of information, that it's at a specific cave. So that's not written on the plaquette, but the plaquettes don't leave the cave where they're made. They tend to stay there in the living area. They're quotidian objects, if you like. So what will happen is that you'll have this plaquette and have a series of what we call sequences on them, these linear sequences of line, which are recording information. Now, at a certain point, and we can demonstrate that there's a very famous reindeer, I think it's a reindeer, from Gudnishol, which has the birthing time of reindeer, which appears to be over about 7 or 8 years by week. So they'll say it was in the last week of month 1, the first week of month 2, the second week of month 2, and then we're back to whatever. So this is across 7 years. And at the top, there appears to be a sign that indicates that reindeer can give birth in either month 1 or month 2, which is factually correct.
Yes.
Now, so clearly they're being kept year on year. It feels, though, that say the reindeer no longer go there, the plaquettes, this is the interesting thing about the plaquettes. The plaquettes are, first of all, broken up. They're smashed. They're deliberately smashed. Most plaquettes are smashed. They're then burnt. And then they're then thrown on the cave floor as a kind of flooring, if you like, a kind of stone flooring, keep you dry, whatever. So the people who say these objects are art simply cannot process that into their argument. They say that you have to destroy the animal because you've made an image of an animal, therefore you must, which you violated some kind of natural code that you've done this, therefore you must destroy it. But then if that's true, why aren't the paintings at Lascaux destroyed?
Right.
You can't have it both ways.
Right.
So what I would say is these plaquettes are beautiful, but their primary function appears to be factual. And you can imagine, say, if you're going to a cave over 100 years and you have a picture of a red deer, after a while it becomes too crowded to read, and you smash it and start a new one. That might account for the fact that there might be many red deer plaquettes at a cave. We don't know. This is speculation.
Sure.
But there has to be a reason from a transition from something of great value and great work to something you throw on the floor and walk on. There has to be transition. The only thing I can think of is you've run out of space. Your piece of paper is full, or that information is no longer valid. Say you're recording birds, which they can be quite variable. They're migratory behavior. You might not have that particular bird anymore. If you keep the plaquette of the bird, you're implying to the people coming next year that bird is here and available for hunting, whereas you know for a fact it's not. Therefore, you dispose of it. This would be my explanation, which fits the facts. The destruction of the plaquettes is a big issue, which no one has. They've not really taken that on board, I think, or come up with a satisfactory answer.
Yeah, fair enough. Back to the extraordinary, at least for us, right? When we look at these the spectacular cave images, the paintings, right? I remember a couple cases that Alan Snyder discussed, and he's an expert in autism,
right,
among children, right? And so you've probably then seen what I'm going to refer to, that is autistic children who are able to produce drawings and paintings which are extraordinarily similar in style, and execution is what we find in these prehistoric cave images. And some of these children actually did have a relatively successful therapy treatment, and were able to overcome a lot of their challenges, and lost their ability to, they lost their artistic ability. They just had normal artistic abilities at that point. And so one question about then that comes up in relation to that are the hand prints, right, that we
Right.
find. Right. So have we, of course, where we have a lot of skeletal evidence, right, right, for Homo sapiens. So do we know, were any of those hands the prints of children, or do we know that the size they're probably all adults?
No, it's a very, very, that's a very good point. There's a professor called April Noel who has written about this, and she's written about it in a slightly different methodology. And if I can, you have the handprints, and clearly some of those are children. It's very easy. They're smaller. And also the spatial distribution, the relations of the fingers to each other. A child's hand is different to an adult's hand.
Of course, yes.
It's shorter, it's chubbier, the ratios are different.
Yes.
So they can prove that their handprints on the wall are made by children. There's another instance where there's, on some of the cave walls, it's not a dry wall, it's a wall of slightly wet silica like clay.
Yes.
And you can actually make an impression. It's like slightly wet sand at the beach where you can draw in it and all the rest. It's not dry, it's not wet, it's in that beautiful in-between state where you can draw on it.
Yes.
Now, on these silica walls, which is called moon milk, this substance is called moon milk, you will have people making images of mammoths or saiga antelopes or whatever it might be by drawing with their hands. And they can use a variety of fingers. They can use 1 finger, 2 finger, up to 5. Now, it is a physical remnant of that person's hand, and they can work out that there are definitely children that are making marks on the wall. And that, I think, is it's different to a child putting their hand in paint and putting it on the wall, or blowing clay around it to make the impression, because that's, a child of 2 does that, doesn't it? At nursery, they dip their hand in, and it's not a cognitive thing, is it?
Right.
But taking your hand and making marks on a wall is a cognitive thing.
Yes, definitely.
They know that children are doing this. And the interestingly enough, I think she details one particular set of marks where it's a child's hand, but the child's hand is too high for a child. So clearly the child has been lifted up.
Yes.
So one might think, oh, well, this is how you do this. You follow my hand here, and this is you do that. So it could be a teaching thing as well. I think because the signs repeat, there's not individual variation. There's a set of marks.
Yes.
It appears that everyone uses them. Therefore, at some stage, that system must be transmitted to new people.
Yes. As good an explanation as I've ever heard. Also,
thank you.
Wild speculation now on my part regarding these hands. My assumption could be wrong, but I think it is the most plausible. My assumption would be that, as I said before, just not anyone, right? So it's not the case that everyone would have been able to produce such exactly representative paintings or images. And so those who could, they would have a special skill set. And so leaving the hand print seems to me indicative, and again, this is wild speculation, but seems to me indicative of something like a signature that representing a certain degree of pride, right? A pride in one's skill, but as we would do today. I mean, if you
Sure.
produce something of quality, you want to be known
It's like the Hollywood
as the originator.
stars leaving their
Yes.
footprints. Yeah.
Yes, yes, yes. But anyway, speculative. But if we leave out maybe the sense of pride, um, but the idea that this is a sort of signature in a way, right? I produced this, right? And well, anyway, we'll never know, will we? But
Well, I think the handprints are something that fascinate us. And I think we talking about the transference of identity. So you have an identity, within yourself of who you are, and that identity can be transmitted through your hand because your hand is unique. So I think you put it on the wall, and it could be. We go back to the idea of the future, that maybe that handprint is there for all time. We're looking at them now.
yes,
It's there. It may be a way of making yourself permanent. It may be a way of, saying to your child, when I die, I'm there. That's me. So you can come and visit. It could be something like that as well. I like the idea of leaving a part of yourself safe in the cave forever.
yes.
I like that idea.
Yes, again, it makes sense, right? Of course, right. The challenge with all of this, right, are the immense distances, right, temporally, that separate us from that time and our time. And yet, I agree. We shouldn't be overly skeptical about the possibility of actually being able, right, to decipher, right, the meanings of some of these signs. If you said the line, the dot, the Y-shaped sign, which can come, I think, in different. It can be to the side or upright. But in any case, that perhaps we'll end on with a question about that, because you've mentioned that this particular shape, the Y shape, right, seems to you to be metaphorical. What exactly do you mean by that? Because I find that intriguing.
Okay. We're particularly interested in metaphor because I think people have argued that analogy and metaphor are the highest expressions in language.
Yes.
They are in many ways the highest abstractions. You're saying something that isn't true to say something that is true. It's a complex idea.
Yes.
Now, I think one of the reasons that it's not been possible for people to break into the system before, because language revolves around nouns and verbs. And the nouns, we have these pictographs. We have, horse is a horse. There's no. It's quite simple. And when I started this work, I thought, where are the verbs? Where are they? The verbs have to be somewhere. And in Sumerian and these other systems, you often get these crude little pictograms.
Yes.
Like, for example, in I think it's archaic Chinese, you have a woman, so she's the sign of a woman, but she's she's front faced. Her legs are spread, and she's squatting, and from between her legs comes an upside down baby, and that's the sign to give birth in archaic Chinese. And we don't get that. We tend not to get that. And I think I saw a horse which had, so imagine a horse, imagine the rump of the horse where the foal is born. There was a single line coming out, and then that line split into two. And this was very, very late at night. I was tired and I just free associated. And the animal was clearly pregnant. The horse is clearly pregnant. So I thought, well, what happens? Birth is one animal, makes two animals. It's kind of that simple, isn't it? And then I looked at the line and I thought, it's a verb. It's one line becomes two lines. So you substitute the word line for animal, and that becomes your verb. So one line splits, becomes two lines. One animal splits, becomes two animals. And this works with other verbs as well. And it's one of the ways of cracking them is that You just look at it, describe it in terms of lines. A line does this, this, and this. Transfer that over to animals, and then you get what the verb means, and then we can then take that and go to our factual information about animals and animals at that cave, and actually demonstrate that that activity does actually happen at that cave at that time.
Yes, yes.
So I don't know if that answers your question about metaphor. We want to pursue metaphor because it shows that these people had fully neurally repurposed.
Right. Well, what I was hinting at, of course, is that you have the dot and the line. Pretty straightforward, right? One dot is one lunar month, etc.,
One-to-one
etc.
representation.
But when we get to this Y-shaped sign, there's a lot more going on cognitively, right? Right. So it's much more complex. Now the nouns and verbs, right? I think one can roughly compare them to, let's say, the relationship that obtains between space and time, right? And so the different strategies one can imagine, and at least according to some of the literature, some prehistoric images seem to repeat the noun. That is, they repeat the image, right, of a single entity. It's repeated in order to show a progression of a story. So in a sense, even though it's a repetition of nouns, it's functioning in a verbal modality, if you will, right? It's telling a story, and like the journey of the horse, or an attack, right, by one individual on another individual, right? And so there's that way of thinking of it as well, perhaps in some very archaic sense, archaic temporally, right? That the sense that you can duplicate, you can replicate and iterate, right, a noun, right, and this imparts action to it, right? So there are probably different strategies, right, where we can get something analogous to verbs as well, and just not strict verbs. Though I actually do agree with your interpretation, right? But I also think that there are probably different strategies.
I would accept that. I mean, if you have a line of mammoths, that's clearly mammoths migrating. And that would be identical to, say, how the Sumerians would do it. If they had mammoths, they would make a picture of it.
Right.
But that, if you tried to show a herd of reindeer crossing a river ford, that would be quite a complex picture. How would you show journey, for example? You know, how would you show something like that? How would you show coming to a place or leaving a place or being at that place? It becomes quite difficult with pictograms. They're open to misinterpretation. Something simple like migration,
yes.
You get complex thing like one of their main verbs is the animal is present at this cave at this time. So you have the cave, which is an oral piece of information. But the sign is two even lines above each other, which kind of shows stasis. You see, it's not, it's stuck, it's in stasis. Both sides are equal. Leaving cancels out going, if you like, something like that. So that's quite clever.
Yes.
And indicating that in Sumerian would be a challenge, I think.
Well, where we do have the replication of a single entity, right? For instance, in Egyptian pharaonic period, Egyptian art, many of those types of images took many decades, right, before they were properly understood. Right, because for instance, battle scenes. So the pharaoh is in his chariot, and the way he's depicted going out into the field, right? At first sight, it just looks like, well, you have 5, 6 different chariots with different people in each one, but it turns out that no, it's actually a story telling of how a single pharaoh, right, is advancing out into the field of battle, right? And so it's very, very concrete. It's not very abstract way
No.
of representing it. But of course, right, we can't look at pharaonic Egyptian artwork and these types of techniques and then project them, into the upper Paleolithic, and yet at the same time, right, maybe there's something we can understand, modifying, qualifying, right? But one can never know, but it's something to keep in mind, because we do see, I think, some prehistoric paintings that do use this convention, at least according to some interpretations. Some of
Oh,
them are like battle scenes, right? One tribe maybe wiping out
yeah.
another.
I think you're absolutely right. And I always think, let's not be didactic and insist that one idea is right and other ideas are
Of course.
wrong.
Yes.
And I think we have to allow for great flexibility and creativity in this system. You would say, for example, this is a very simple example of what you're saying, but there are many mating scenes where you'll have a male behind a female, and
Mhm.
you'll have the calendar indicating that's the time of year for it. So yeah, I do. I completely agree with you. But it's interesting then, that becomes quite impressive, because it means that there are different ways to do this different thing. And that's the sign of a very simple writing system, but one that's advancing,
Mhm.
one that's developing, one that has various ways of achieving
Mhm.
what it needs to say. And that's a sign of advancement, I think.
Yes. Well, an image of two animals in the act of mating, that's certainly a verb, right?
To
As well as
mate.
a noun.
Yeah.
All right. Yes,
Yeah.
excellent. Well, I think the methodological principle we should always cling to, of course, is try all possibilities, try all positives, try all hypotheses, right, and all theories, and that's the way we advance knowledge. And I appreciate what you've done. You certainly are advancing knowledge together with the team that you work
Yes.
with several scholars.
Great team.
All right. So, final question. This time, I mean that. Final question. What are you doing for the future, right? In relating to this same topic. What are
What
the future plans?
what has happened is, this is really semantics, isn't it? This is what we're doing. This is
Hmm.
linguistics,
Yes.
and my view is that it happens to take place within the caves, which are beautiful and all the rest. But basically, we're looking at how human beings create writing systems, and these writing systems seem to evolve along certain similar lines,
Hmm.
but also to be specific to their circumstances as well.
Certainly.
So we have examples of these very sophisticated urban societies in China and Sumeria and Egypt, but here we have a different society which is intellectually as equal as them, but its culture is different, its needs are different. So it
Yes.
creates it creates the tools for its needs. So I'm working with a professor of semantics at UCL, and we're moving this forward using quantitative semantics.
Yes.
That's which is, I think, what we did in the first paper. We were just amassing data, get big data sets, and look at co-occurrences.
Hmm.
And then we can use knowledge of the animals in the caves to work out what the sign means.
Right.
And it seems to be quite well, in my view. It seems to be quite successful.
Hmm.
Funding would be great. We don't have any funding. Everyone's working pro bono, as it were.
Hmm.
But we'll push this forward. We'll get our papers out there. We have a lot. We have a lot to say. We're quite far into this system. I think in 2-3 decades we'll probably know all of it. I think different scholars working on this. There's another team working in Tübingen called Signbase. I don't know if you know them.
Yes.
Signbase.org. You know them.
Yes. Yes.
I think they're a great team. They they're using quantitative semantics and all the rest
as
of big
well.
databases,
Yes.
but they seem to think it's not possible to actually crack the meanings. I mean, they're guarded about this. They say they don't think it's possible. It may be, but they don't have high hopes. But I think their methodology is great, to be honest with you, and it shows that modern semantics, I think, is going to be taking over from Paleolithic scholars who may not be familiar with semantics and semiotics as some of these new teams forming. What are your thoughts, if I may ask you? I mean, you...
Sure. My, well, just methodologically, right? My own methodology would be that we would be able to identify the meanings of different signs with different levels of confidence, right?
Right.
Depending on the quality and availability of the corroborating evidence, right? And so in this particular case, what you have to say about the dot and the line, this for me has this is open and shut. It's quite clear, right? Because of the corroborating evidence that we're talking about a lunar calendar,
Yeah.
right? And so this, I don't know if, like in physics, right? We talk about sigma 5 level of proof, but in any case, I think that's as strong as one could wish, right? So the interpretation of the dot and the line. Now the Y shape, my own personal opinion is that I'm not as confident, but my level of confidence is still very high. That's very high. That seems very straightforward, actually. Again, because of the corroborating and of the available evidence, right?
The animal evidence, you mean
the animal evidence, yeah.
space and time, yeah.
Yes. And so with all the other signs, it would be a matter of, running through the same evidence and seeing, just so I would establish different levels of confidence, right?
Right.
And so far, the dot and the line, I'm 100% sold. That's pretty straightforward. And I think for most experts in the field, is going to be, they're going to be convinced. And so I don't know. I would hazard to guess that then maybe, I don't know. This has no meaning, but I'll say like 70% of experts are probably going to be convinced about the interpretation of the Y shape. And I think part of that is that it's going to take time for researchers to be convinced, right? Again, this is, as you pointed out, has to do with methodology. It's going to take time for researchers to be able to, let's say, rewire their own brains to believe that this is even possible in principle, even, all right, to understand what the dot and the line means, right? So but once that barrier is crossed, and right, you have scientific argumentation and evidence, right? I think that many a scholar, right, will be able to be convinced. Yes, some of these signs we can definitely know what they actually meant, right? And so the others, just going to have to take a lot of research and see how good the argumentation is, how it holds up, what's the corroborating evidence, right? And so that's all I could say about that. But the dot and the line, hey, that's just marvelous, right?
Thank you.
It's one. I don't want to exaggerate, but right, in a person's lifetime, a breakthrough of this magnitude, right, one is lucky if it occurs, right? One is fortunate, right? And so we're fortunate that we've been able to understand, I think, with a high degree of confidence what the dot and the line means, right, on these paintings coordinated with animals.
Yeah.
It's really amazing work. You're to be congratulated, sir.
Thank you very much. I think thank you for your understanding, your support, because it means something to know, not so much that your conclusions are right, but that your methodology is right. Methodology is more important, I think.
Yes.
So we will continue we're going to make our methodology more rigorous. We're going to start doing 2 compilers of databases, which will then be blind checked against each other, trying to make it more rigorous, because to a certain extent, there's subjectivity in this world. We're
Yes,
dealing
of
with
course.
many objects made by many people in many different conditions of preservation, etc. So we'll try to increase the reliability of the data, double check it, blind check it, and then statistically analyze it. And it is, I have to say, it's looking very promising. It's looking very promising.
Yes. Well, I look forward to following it. Well, all best wishes in your life and in your work, especially in this field. And let's stay in touch.
Yeah, and when your book does actually become purchasable, would you let me know?
Certainly, I will. And in the very near future, I will have an interview with George Steiner also on this topic, and also on the topic of the Homo naledi etchings, right? And so that will be relatively soon. So I'll send you the link to that
That would be great.
as well, right? He'll be commenting on your paper together with the team, right? And also Berger's Homo naledi paper that's in the news right now.
Okay, fantastic.
Yes.
Fantastic. It's been great for me talking to you. Thank you.
You're welcome. It's been my pleasure.
Thank you.
All right.
Talk soon.
All right. Talk soon. Take care.
Bye-bye.
If you enjoyed the program, please consider supporting this channel with a donation through Patreon or PayPal. And don't forget to subscribe. Thank you.